In Europe, almost every language belongs to one family. Latin, Germanic, Slavic, Celtic, they all trace back to a common root. But one language does not belong to any of them. It has no known relatives, no linguistic cousins, no clear origin. It is spoken by the Basques, who live in the mountains between Spain and France. For generations, the story has been that these people are Europe's oldest survivors, a population untouched by the great migrations that reshaped the continent. The mountains, it was said, protected them. They were a living fossil of the Old Stone Age. But that story always contained a quiet contradiction. How could a people so uniquely ancient have emerged from the same waves of conquest that swept away every other pre-Indo-European culture? The traditional answer was geography, but the truth was written in their genes. The official story painted a simple picture. When Neolithic farmers spread from the Near East around 8,000 years ago, bringing agriculture and new ways of life, they were believed to have bypassed this rugged, mountainous region. When Bronze Age warriors thundered across Europe from the steppes north of the Black Sea, bringing Indo-European tongues like Celtic and later Latin, the Pyrenees were thought to have acted as an impenetrable shield. The Basque language, Euskara, appeared to be a surviving pre-Indo-European language, a remnant of a world before conquest. The conclusion felt inevitable. The Basques were the direct descendants of Europe's first modern humans, a Paleolithic population that had remained genetically intact for over 10,000 years. They were not just another European ethnicity, they were the original Europeans. To understand the foundation of this story, we travel back to the end of the last ice age. Archaeological digs in the Pyrenees and along the Cantabrian coast reveal a human presence stretching back to the hunter-gatherers who painted the caves of Altamira. These were the people who lived through the final millennium of the Ice Age, leaving behind some of the most extraordinary art ever created. For decades, the assumption was that these were the direct ancestors of the modern Basques. When the first DNA studies emerged in the 1990s and early 2000s, they seemed to offer support. Analyses of mitochondrial DNA, passed down the maternal line, showed that modern Basques possessed high frequencies of haplogroups associated with Paleolithic hunter-gatherers. It appeared that the Basques had maintained maternal lineages tracing back to the original inhabitants of the continent, bypassing the genetic turnover that had occurred elsewhere in Europe. This Ice Age population was presumed to be the genetic bedrock of the Basque people. But something strange happened in the Pyrenees. Around 5500 BCE, the Neolithic period arrived. Across the rest of Europe, the introduction of farming was accompanied by a massive wave of immigration from Anatolia in what is now Turkey. These new peoples replaced up to 90% of the existing hunter-gatherer populations in many regions, from the British Isles to the Mediterranean coast. The traditional view held that the Basques were the exception. Yet when scientists sequenced the genomes of Neolithic remains within the Basque region itself, the evidence told a different story. The first farmers who arrived in the Pyrenees were not locals who had simply adopted agriculture. They were genetically the same Anatolian-derived migrants who were transforming the rest of the continent. And the hunter-gatherers who preceded them did not persist. Their genetic signature became much smaller after the arrival of farmers. The Basque country had been repopulated from the south, just like everywhere else. The people of Altamira were not the direct ancestors of the Basques. Now, picture the landscape of the Bronze Age. Across the vast grasslands stretching north of the Black Sea, horse-riding herders from the Yamnaya culture began moving west. They carried new technology and new languages that would eventually evolve into the entire Indo-European family, from Sanskrit to Spanish. By 2500 BCE, their descendants had reached the Pyrenees. The archaeological record shows dramatic changes in the Basque region during this period. Collective burial in megalithic tombs gave way to individual burials under mounds reminiscent of the steppe kurgans. The bell beaker phenomenon, a vast cultural network connecting the Rhine to the Danube to Iberia, left its mark in the form of distinctive ceramic vessels found in grades across the region. For historians, the question was whether these changes represented cultural diffusion, the spread of ideas and objects, or actual migration. If a migration had occurred, the Basque language should have been replaced, as it was elsewhere in Iberia with the rise of Celtic and later Latin. But the language survived. Something happened in the Pyrenees that allowed its people to adopt new technologies and social structures while preserving a unique linguistic identity. The archaeological records showed change, but the language told a different story. The tension was unresolved for decades. Then came the ancient DNA. Beginning with large-scale studies published in 2018, researchers sequenced the genomes of dozens of individuals from the Iberian Peninsula, spanning the Neolithic to the Iron Age. When they analyzed the remains from the Basque country specifically, the pattern became clear. The Neolithic population of the region did not persist unchanged. Beginning around 2500 BCE, a significant influx of steppe ancestry arrived in the Pyrenees. This was the same genetic component that had transformed northern and central Europe, the DNA of the Yamnaya herders and their descendants. Admixture models now show that the ancestry of modern Basques is roughly 2/3 Neolithic farmer DNA, with the remaining 1/3 coming from these steppe migrants. The Basques were not sheltered from the Bronze Age transformation. Their genetic identity was forged not in the Paleolithic, but in the 3rd millennium BCE, when two distinct ancestral streams collided. The caves of Altamira were not their origin point. The collision of worlds on the steppe and in the fields of Neolithic farmers was. The steppe ancestry arrived primarily through male lineages. The Y chromosome lineages of modern Basque men are dominated by haplogroup R1b, a marker directly linked to the steppe migrations. More than 80% of Basque men carry this lineage, one of the highest frequencies in Europe. The new arrivals did not simply blend in. They appeared to have established themselves as a dominant group, reshaping the social structure of the region. Their grave sites are rich in grave goods. Their genetic signature spread rapidly. The Basque country was not a forgotten backwater, isolated from continental events. It was a western node in a continent-wide transformation that redrew the genetic map of Europe. The same lineages that appear in the Pyrenees appear in the British Isles, in the Alps, in the river valleys of Germany and France. The Basques were connected to a world far larger than their mountain valleys. And yet, the language survived. The evidence suggests a layered society with a complex dynamic. Incoming male lineages held a privileged position, likely controlling resources, marriage alliances, and political power. But the local population, descended largely from the Neolithic farmers, retained their language. The local language appears to have survived despite major genetic change. Over generations, the incoming groups integrated into this existing society, adopting the local tongue rather than imposing their own Indo-European speech. It is one of the great reversals in linguistic history. A population that underwent significant genetic transformation in its male lines, that adopted the technologies and social structures of the newcomers, nevertheless kept the language of the earlier population. DNA alone did not decide who these people became. It was shaped by culture, by power, by the quiet endurance of a people who refused to let their voice disappear. This is where the older narrative collapses. The belief that the Basques are a Paleolithic relic, untouched and pure, is not supported by the evidence. The genetic data shows a layered history of displacement and mixing. The hunter-gatherers saw their genetic signature become much smaller after the arrival of farmers. Those farmers were then significantly admixed with steppe herders. The continuity is not of isolation, but of resilience. The Basque people did not survive by being locked away from history. They survived by absorbing new peoples, by integrating new genetic components, by adopting to new technologies and social structures, all while preserving the one element that truly defines their cultural identity: their language. The Basques are not a remnant of the Paleolithic preserved in amber. They are the inheritors of a deep Neolithic farming tradition layered with the warrior lineages of Bronze Age steppe herders. Their genetic story is not of purity, but of mixture. Their cultural story is not of isolation, but of selective absorption. The mountains did not shield them from change. They became the place where different worlds merged, where languages collided, and one emerged victorious not through conquest, but through endurance. The ancient genomes from the Pyrenees tell us that the people who call themselves Euskaldunak are not a lost world. They are the living product of the forces that made modern Europe. They carry within them the legacy of the first farmers who tamed the land, and the steppe herders who reshaped the continent. Their uniqueness was not preserved by accident.
It was forged through centuries of integration and adaptation. The secret hidden for centuries was never that they were untouched, it was that they endured by changing. And in that change, they remained themselves. Their story is written in the genome, and so is yours. If you want to explore your own ancestral story to see whether your genetic history contains these same layers of migration and mixture, subscribe to Genealogy X. We bring you the latest discoveries in ancient DNA, human migration, and the hidden stories written in our genes. Hit subscribe and join us as we uncover the past one genome at a time, because the past is not a distant place, it is carried in every one of us.